Hey guys, so I've been looking into Tesla's work and I came across this guy who spent years researching Tesla's findings. He's since passed away. Before he passed away, he said that he wanted the connection he found between the Mandela effect and Tesla's work to be circulated. Here's what he had to say.
Hi, this is W0TM, also known as Wotum. I don't often do a video, which means my view count is probably low. I hope someone else picks this up and makes it viral because I believe it is important. Unlike many on YouTube, I only um, do videos when something is really, really, really important, and I believe this is. Um, Mandela effect is real. I've known about it for a long time, been waiting for it, hoping that no one would attempt to do it. It's just called the Mandela effect for reasons that you probably have already read. It could be called anything. It's more so merging of dimensions. As the few of you that have watched me on a regular basis, um, haven't broadcast for a long time, but write me and so forth, know that I am a devotee of Nikola Tesla and have been since the age of 14 when I was given a book on Nikola Tesla by my science teacher for, of all things, helping him get a ham radio license. Won't get into all that, but I read that book and I was just fascinated. I was fascinated by Tesla to the point that through a book lending program that was and still is, I think, in the Kansas City area, which is where I live, that at the time, everything Tesla had written, had done, so forth, had been put into print and was freely available. I checked out every single book and read them to the point where I had them memorized. I then did experiments, testing, um, trying out his methods, and I actually made some of them work. I came up with some free radio parts through a ham radio program that I won't get into that, but I was able to generate several million electrostatic volts, which means no amperage but high voltage, which is a very much a key to much of what Tesla had. Tesla, in his work, to get down to it, said that there is more than the dimension we live in. There are multi-dimensions. And he went on, if you really read in depth, to describe some of those dimensions. And if you really went in depth, you could figure out how to view at least some of those dimensions. He, being braver than me, I think, figured out a way to actually visit, so he said, claimed several of the dimensions, and in those said that there's at least 24 dimensions besides the four that we know, which is you have to include time to come up with four dimensions, but I consider time to be a dimension. Anyway, I simulated that. I was able to look into dimensions up to the 10th dimension. I've said this to friends several times who, of course, thought I was crazy. And I pretty much have kept things to myself, other than continuing to study many of Tesla's works. At the age of 16, and his anti-gravity uh, theory, I managed to launch from outside a pair of pliers into the atmosphere, which by now is probably somewhere past the planet Pluto, back when Pluto was a planet. Uh, I could never get the anti-gravity. I couldn't direct it. I could cause things to levitate, but they would go wild, they would jump, they would jitter. What good is that? Well, I went on to work for the Atomic Energy Commission, who, in a sense, essentially drafted me because they learned through papers I wrote for school of some of the Tesla work that I did, anti-gravity, time, space, um, uh, faster than the speed of light, many things that Tesla did. And theories that he had some theories that he could never make possible because when he died, when he was murdered, as far as I'm concerned, he was murdered in 1943, the technology that he needed was not invented yet. Well, by the time I got to it in the early 1960s, it had been invented. Things like diodes, transistors, um, other gadgets, technologies, inventions. I was able to do inventions or prove theories that he could only guess at. I didn't pursue it much further. Anyway, where we are now is that Tesla said the dimension, we're the first dimension. We are number one. Tesla said that. He said number two is almost like us. It's almost a mirror. It's almost, like 99%. Um, he went on to say, he talked about other dimensions, the fourth and fifth dimension. He didn't like too much because, well, I'll just say it, Satan, Beelzebub, Lucifer, whatever you want to call it, him, controls or has the fourth and fifth and maybe the sixth dimension. I have peered into those dimensions and I definitely did not want to go into those dimensions. I peered into the seventh dimension and it was a brilliant white light that filled the entire dimension. Tesla, in books, in writings that have supposedly been destroyed, you go to the Library of Congress and you look up those numbers, that a number of books, writings that Tesla did, which I have read. I won't tell you how I got to read them, but I did. I read them all, and I have a very good memory. I could almost recite what he wrote. He said, he considers the seventh dimension as being the dimension of God. I know this sounds crazy, but hey, the Mandela effect sounds crazy. Eighth and ninth is just random, and I could find nothing above the 10th dimension, and in fact, Tesla said he had gone up to the 24th dimension and found that he couldn't find anything. And he said dimensions go far beyond that. But he stopped at number 24 because he couldn't find anything. And I couldn't find anything either. So why are there dimensions above the ninth dimension, which is the last one that has anything in it? Why is there anything in life? I don't know. You'll have to ask God why he created dimensions the way that he did. Tesla, there was very adamant that it would not be smart to ever merge dimensions. He did say the first and second dimensions are so close that merging those two dimensions, which appears to be going on right now, could cause a lot of trouble, but would probably not end the world. Bringing in the third and our fourth dimension, the pure evil, you've read about, things coming through Stargate and so forth that you really don't want to see. You don't want to. You don't want them in the world. Bringing in the third and fourth dimension would cause worldwide panic. Probably be the end of the world. So what CERN, they're, for whatever reason, apparently having some success merging the first and second dimension. Tesla also said that each dimension is more powerful than the dimension below it. So if a merge happens, the higher dimension takes over. Well, that's what's happening right now. When you look at your Bible, for instance, and you see word changes, and you see things like Berenstain Bears, logos, and J.C. Penney, and there's been hundreds of examples of this Mandela effect changing things, but so far nothing that is going to even hardly be noticed by most people. Of course, 98% of people are numb above, in my opinion, numb above the neck about called the New World Order, Illuminati, what's going on, so on and so forth. They just, if you try to bring it up, they just write you off as a total, that you're mentally unbalanced. So personally, I just keep quiet. So anyway, the Mandela effect is starting to happen. How far will it go? I don't know. They're on the second dimension. They're merging the second dimension into the first dimension, our dimension. The second dimension is very close to the first dimension. If they if they stop there, it may never even be noticed. People will look at the Berenstain Bears and labels on other cans and candy bars and so forth, and the object of trying to get people to stop believing the Bible. They might succeed at that. I don't know how far they're going to go. It just depends if they're going to stop here or go to the third dimension and open up the Stargate, which they have in Switzerland with CERN, and allow in some of the inhabitants of the third dimension, and that's not going to be good. Uh, watch any science fiction movie with some really bad things happening, and call them monsters um, coming in, and Satan directing the whole thing almost like a play. That's going to happen, or could happen, if they decide to go to the third dimension. The people at CERN, in my opinion, are psychotic. They are atheists. You can be an atheist. I'm not, whatever. I'm Christian, but if somebody wants to be an atheist, that's okay. But they have to be an atheist to have the mindset to do what they're doing at CERN, of merging the second dimension into the first, which is happening right now, and then thinking, I'm sure they are, about opening up the third dimension. If that happens, look out. I don't know if there will be any place to hide. Our preppers or anything else will do you any good. The people of the New World Order that are directing this thing and paying for it, they may think they can control it, but I don't think they can. Open up the third dimension, I'll just say it, all hell will break loose, and no one will be able to stop or control what happens. And if they go into the fourth and fifth dimension, um, you can just write this planet off, as far as I'm concerned, um, and which is Satan's uh, goal, and to take the souls of the 7 billion inhabitants and believe that he has won over God, which has been the eternal struggle of good and evil, God versus Satan. But God is infinity, and Satan is infinity minus one, which has infuriated him time immemorial. I don't see that changing. I have faith in God. I believe that whatever happens, um, Satan will not, the fallen angel will not become the new God. The Antichrist will not become the new God, and evil will not reign over the universe. So that is what is happening with what's been called the Mandela effect. So now you know, Tesla was right. Everything he said was correct. Much of it has been supposedly destroyed, but I know it, and you now know it. It's supposedly was destroyed. All the papers were supposedly destroyed in the fire that killed him and 24 innocent other down on their luck inhabitants of a pay by the night cot type living in New York City, and how odd that all of the papers and notes from Tesla's very small apartment escaped, and were in pristine condition when I read them in the basement of a locked, very well guarded facility many years later. But Tesla was left to die in that fire while his papers and everything else were taken. So obviously intentional. So this is W0TM signing off. I hope I've explained things enough.
So as y'all can see, I made a rudimentary illustration of the breakdown of dimensions that was being discussed. You can think of these layers of reality as dimensions as well as layers of awareness within each person's consciousness that vary based on an individual's frequency. I also think it is possible to sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes jump back and forth between dimensional layers. And with each reality dimension, there's layers of awareness within each reality, if that makes sense. It's represented by the lines that I put in. Tesla's work actually found that there are many frequency layers, but my chart only includes a couple of the levels that Tesla found. So our base level began on a reality where there was no Mandela effect that was perceived. As the dimension slightly above the original base reality began to collapse or merge with us, some people became aware of the ME. Now, keep in mind, the majority of the population is still trapped in the original base reality. With time, many people who are already Mandela affected will become aware of the merging of the veil barriers of fear, terror, and delusion as it merges with our Mandela effect layer reality. So when the veil barrier of fear and illusion merges, we'll be able to perceive NPCs more easily. We'll be able to perceive possessed people. When the veil barrier of terror and illusion merges with a person's dimension, they'll most likely, I think, be able to they'll go through a sort of spiritual persecution. I really think that this is the dimension where many targeted individuals live in until they're able to transcend above it. So just like the people trapped at the base reality of the pre-Mandela Earth, we can become trapped in the negative veil barriers if we don't use our free will to burst through the veil of terror and illusion to get to the new earth. At first, the only clue that we're on the new earth will be our emotions. Even though chaos will be going on around us, we will feel a strong, tangible sense of peace and grace. Eventually, if we can train ourselves to remain in those feelings of peace and grace, despite what may be going on around us, our senses will expand to view the new earth instead of only being able to feel the new earth. We'll not only be able to feel profound feelings of peace and bliss, but we will also be in an earth dimension where all the chaos that was previously going on around us has disappeared, and there will be nothing but beauty in our environment. Colors will look deeper and brighter than ever there, and music and sounds will be very amplified and clearer than ever. But the new earth dimension is what I call the infinitely heavenly realms. I think once a person gets to that level, they may not even need a physical body. I'm assuming it will be generations before people born on earth can climb to the infinitely heavenly realms while still living on earth. I'm not sure of the source of what's making dimensions merge. I think it's got to be at least two sources. CERN could be playing a role, and the Schumann resonance could be playing a role. If you haven't checked out I made a three-part series about how the Schumann resonance and our brain waves relate to the Mandela effect. So check that out if you haven't already. The series also covers what's causing the Schumann resonance to become erratic. So I'll put links below in the description. I would recommend you start with part 2, then work your way to part 1 and 3. But yeah, CERN's power to manipulate dimensional merges is probably, it's playing a role, but I think it's pretty limited compared to the Schumann resonance, which surrounds the entire Earth. That's not to say, though, that CERN isn't trying to manipulate the words in the Bible and create mass hysteria. I think what's going on may be related to ascension, spiritual evolution, whatever phrase you'd like to use. There are biblical terms for this as well. It may seem scary when the veil barriers of fear, terror, and illusion merge, but ultimately, I think that it's what our soul needs to go through in order to burst through that veil and make it through to the other side, to the new earth dimension. This bursting through the veil will probably, I think, be done on an individual level. I mean, we could literally be sitting next to someone who is in the pre-Mandela world reality while we're in the first new earth dimension, or maybe even in one of the veil barriers of fear and illusion layer. And people wouldn't even be able to tell, since, you know, we're all kind of living in the same physical space with only our awareness being in different dimensions. I think the thing we need to be on guard on, or be on guard of, is just because we burst through one of the dimensional veils, that doesn't mean we can't sink back down into a previous dimension that we were in. I think it truly is continuous work that the soul needs to take part in to ensure that they stay in the dimension that they want to stay in. Maybe we are in frequency training boot camp of sorts, where we have to learn how to raise our frequency and move to the dimension we want through honing our free will. A sort of soul training where we learn how to board and stay on a kind of consciousness arc that will help raise us to the dimension where we want to be. Sounds easy, right? You know, just think a happy thought, like in Peter Pan, and we can fly. But the lower dimensions will throw all kinds of dirt at us to manipulate our way of thinking and manipulate our belief systems and trick us into staying in the dimensions below the new earth. That's what the media was created for. I wouldn't be surprised if half the people listening to this were offended by me even mentioning the term dimension, because of what this world has conditioned them to think about the word dimension. When I use that word, it's just, dimension is simply a term I'm using to refer to a person's frequency state of consciousness and awareness. So how do we burst through all of these veils and make it through to higher dimensions? I think we have to control our thoughts. When we're able to control our thoughts, we can directly control our beliefs and feelings. I think there's a direct, well, I don't think, I know that there's a direct connection between our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. I will say listening to positive music really helps too. Also, a huge part to being able to ride the consciousness arc to the new earth is how ready our soul is. If our soul is not ready to transcend its previous conditioning of illusions and false beliefs, it will not be able to pierce through the veil. With someone who is not ready, there's no amount of evidence you can present and nothing you can say to someone to make them come to the new earth dimension with you. It's an individual choice that each person will have to make on their own. And As sad as it is to see our loved ones choosing not to ascend, people's free will is still a great gift from God. It's our free will that will keep us in the lower dimensions or allow us to ascend to the new earth. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. And the dimensional merging that's going on through CERN and the Schumann resonance becoming erratic will only speed up the process. So the only question is, it's which dimension are you content with living in? I think we can choose. We always have a choice.
Dreaming about the world as one, and I believe it could be. Someday it's going to come. 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country. Come take me home again.